All right, let me move a couple things out of the way. Caitlin, Cincinnati Art Museum, excellent. So I'll go ahead and get started. Actually, let me pop out participants to make sure if I need to let anyone else in. So thank you all for joining. This presentation is called Demystifying R, a guided tour. I'm David Keyes. I run R for the Rest of Us, and joining me as well as Charlie Hadley. We'll actually introduce ourselves just a bit more in a second. For right now, though, while I'm just going to give folks a minute or two to get started, and I'll put this in the chat. If you all don't mind just going to that URL that I posted, that'll actually redirect you to a very short survey that will allow us to have some data to work with that we'll do in R in just a minute. So if you can just fill that out, that would be great. I am just going to make sure that that data is coming in correctly. Should. We've done this a number of times. Here, let me just fill it out real quick as an example, just to. Make sure. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I can see it's coming in. Excellent. Super. I see one response. If folks, other folks could do that, that would be great. Give us just a bit more data to work with. It's not going to look very good with just one response. Awesome. All right. So just really quick logistics, the recording, the slides, and the report that we're going to make, which might not make sense to you now, but will shortly. We'll post all those at rfortherestofus.com/demystifying. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Charlie and I do a lot of this kind of presenting, and you'll see I will be looking at my second screen, so I'm happy to stop if necessary, if there are any questions, or Charlie may answer them as well. And then we'll also have some time for Q&A at the end. So let's actually just start out, have Charlie and us introduce ourselves. So I'm David Keyes. I run R for the Rest of Us. I started it in 2019. My background is that I'm actually an anthropologist by training. I did a PhD in anthropology, moved into what's called evaluation, which is kind of applied social science type research, helping nonprofits, government agencies, education institutions to improve their work. And in doing that, I was using Excel, got a little bored with using Excel, had heard that R was great, and taught myself R. And in the process, realized that I really liked R. I also used to be an elementary school teacher, so I kind of combined my interests and created R for the Rest of Us. And the thing that I found when I taught myself R is that a lot of the resources were really geared towards people of a much more quantitative background than me. I do descriptive statistics and kind of basic stats, but I don't do any complex statistics. And so I really wanted to make resources that were going to be relevant to people like me. And so that's where R for the Rest of Us came from. And it's, yeah, what I've been doing for the last, gosh, 3 years now. So Charlie, why don't you, I'm going to unmute you. I muted you just because you're, to make sure we didn't hear your keyboard too much. But if you don't mind just going ahead and introducing yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So, hey, I'm Charlie Hadley. I've been using R since 2015, which I taught myself for a job at University of Oxford, where I built an interactive data visualization service for researchers at Oxford to visualize open data sets. And we built that with a tool called Shiny. And Shiny is this really awesome thing in R that allows us to build interactive web applications or websites. And since then, I've done lots of data visualization and some data science-y things with R. My background is in physics, but I recently looked my vector calculus exam papers and I don't remember any vector calculus anymore. So most of what I do these days is descriptive statistics, and I work with R for the rest of us on R in 3 months, where I provide weekly feedback videos for the assignments. And I also work with David on providing coaching and training, specifically in using an RMarkdown to create reports.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlie. Fun fact, I actually, when I was learning R, took a course that Charlie had made. And so it's been a real delight for me to have Charlie now be part of helping others learn R. All right, so I'm looking at your responses over here, and I see there's one person who has a bit more familiarity, but it looks like most people are pretty unfamiliar with R. I am assuming that folks are not familiar at all with R. I'm really pitching that, like gearing this to people who have never really used R. So let's talk about first kind of like what R is, because I know when I was learning R, I was really confused. I was like, well, what is it? I had done kind of a tiny bit of programming. I'd done some website work with HTML and CSS, but I'd never really done kind of intense programming, which of course R is a programming language. So to talk about what R is, one thing that's slightly confusing is that you actually have to download 2 things. The first thing that you download when you're working with R is R itself. So I have a link here, which I'll post if folks are interested. Whoops. Oh, that's not working right now. Hold on, let me. Charlie, can you post a link in the chat to one of the places where people could download R? The link that I have here is broken. So what you do, and Charlie will post a link, is you actually have to download first R. And when you download R, if you open up R, and I'll actually show you in just a second, it looks like this. This is a screenshot from a little bit ago, but it looks basically the same. Let me actually go and show you in on my computer right now what it looks like if you just work in R. So not the most user-friendly thing, right? Like if I open this up, I basically have a command line. And for those of us who are old enough to remember like DOS and that kind of thing, you know, it kind of looks like that, right? And I can type things here. I can type 2 + 2, I get 4. I could do more complicated math. I could do 190 × 10, get 1900, but really not the most user-friendly way to work with R. But in order to use R, you do have to download this first. Let me close that. However, most people, when they work in R, actually work in something called RStudio. And the metaphor that I like to use is that RStudio, or R, is like the engine. It gives you kind of the functionality that you need in order to use it. But RStudio is like a dashboard. It makes it much easier to work with. And like you could, you know, if you look at really old cars, right, like they don't really have the dashboard. So you had to do a lot more manual work than you do today. So RStudio, you download that on the RStudio website, which I'll post a link to here. And I should say as well, there's a free course on the R for the Rest of Us website if you want videos and instructions that'll kind of walk you through this, but I just like to give people kind of an overview. So you download that, and then what you end up is an interface that looks like this. And so if you look closely, and actually let me exit out of this and let me work in here. So if you look closely at this, you'll see, oops, I shouldn't have run that yet. Let me go back up here. This section right here, that's going to look exactly the same as R, when I just opened up R by itself. But what you get is you get other things up here. For example, you get files that you can save. And so I have what's called an R script file here, which is kind of code that I can run. You also get this panel up here, which gives you it shows you essentially the data that you have available to work with. And then down here you have, for example, files that are all part of what's called a project. So it just provides you a lot more kind of wraparound in addition to what you get if you just work with R. And it makes it much, much, much easier than working with just R. But it's confusing because people say, like, I use R, but what they mostly mean is they're using R, but within the context of RStudio. The thing about R too is that when people think about really like what makes it powerful, what they're talking about is not just R itself, but it's the idea of packages. Packages, another metaphor that I like to use, and both of these metaphors come from the book Modern Dive. Packages, the metaphor is that R itself is like a phone, right? Like you get a new iPhone or Android or whatever, it's got a bunch of apps on there. It can do a lot, but you probably want to do some specific things that you don't have the apps right away. And so when you work with R, you can find packages that are like apps that you can download that allow you to do various things in R. Examples of packages, the example that I tell people about starting out is called the Tidyverse. It's actually a collection of several packages. And let me actually go to that page and just show you. There are a bunch of different packages. So if I click on these, for example, there's a package called ggplot. I'll talk about that in a second. It's for making data visualization. There's a package called dplyr, which helps you to kind of wrangle, clean, etc. your data. Kind of similar with tidyr, readr imports data. There's a whole bunch of packages here. And these do things that without having access to these packages would be really complicated. As an example, one of the Tidyverse packages allows you to kind of like transpose your data. So if you have your data in a wide format and you want to get it in a long format, there are functions to do that. Without those packages, it would be really much, much more complicated. And so packages are really where a lot of the power of R is found. The other cool thing about packages is that because R is what's called open source, it means that anybody can develop packages. And so as a result, there are just thousands and thousands of packages that do all sorts of things that, at least to my knowledge, are not available in other tools like SPSS or SAS, tools that are not open source. So as an example, I'm showing you a description of a package called GenderCoder, which I will use in a minute, which allows you, if you do any kind of survey work, you know that oftentimes you want to get responses about gender. However, to the degree that you're asking, are you like man, are you male, female, other? It's not necessarily inclusive of the responses that people would prefer to give. And so GenderCoder allows you to provide a place for people to, in an open-ended way, list their gender. And then after the fact, we can use this package to recode things into a set of categories for analysis. And I'll show this. You probably are thinking now, oh yeah, that's what David did in that survey. He didn't have categories for the responses. He just asked you or asked me to list my gender in an open-ended fashion. So let's talk now about a few of the reasons why I think using R makes sense. The first one is that you can end up doing data analysis really quickly. Here, what I have is just like a snippet of data. This is from NHANES, which is a survey done here in the US called the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. It's run by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. And they asked people a number of questions I just got a little bit of data here to show you kind of like what we're working with. Let's say we wanted to do a little summary of this. This is the type of code that you end up working with. And I know if you've never used R, you might be looking at this like being like, that doesn't really make sense to me. Let me kind of briefly walk you through it and explain what's going on. What this means is we're starting with the NHANES data. And this little funny thing is what's called a pipe. It allows you to do kind of a series of steps on starting with a certain bit of data. So for example, we're saying, start with the NHANES data, then group by gender. So let's say, for example, I should have said this. Let's say we want to get like average height by gender from this survey, and they have closed response gender categories. So say we want to group by gender so that we can do a summary for males, do a summary for females. Then this will drop any NA. So in other words, any places where we don't have a value. Looks like all of these, we actually do have a value, but sometimes we don't have their height for some reason. And then what we're doing is saying summarize, where we're creating a new variable called mean height, which is equal to the mean of the height variable, so this variable. So when you run that, you end up with this. And the nice thing about this is this type of code, first of all, it's pretty user-friendly as code goes, right? Like group by is written in English. It's not, some weird acronym that does this or that. Drop NA, same thing. Summarize, same thing. And that's actually a function, or that's a result of using the tidyverse. Those packages tend to have function names that are written as English words, which makes them much easier to remember. The other thing is, this might look like not necessarily gibberish, but something like, how would I ever remember that? But once you work with it for a bit, this type of thing, like doing a group by, summarize, dropping NAs, it becomes kind of second nature. And so whereas, for example, me, when I used to work in Excel, if I ever wanted to do this, every time I'd have to like manually create a pivot table or, create new variables, something like that. Like I could just do this same thing. I could even copy this code and just change the variables, and I would end up with a new summary, which is really handy. The main reason I would say that I got into doing data visualization, to using R, was doing data visualization. What you're looking at is an example of data visualization made by the BBC. I actually just recently I interviewed some folks from the BBC about how they use R. And the really nice thing is that R, and specifically the package called ggplot, is super flexible. So if you look at this is a wide variety of types of visualizations, but all of these are made with ggplot. And all of these, like you could make them with Excel, minus maybe that one. I don't know how you would make that with Excel, although there probably is a way. But ggplot is super flexible and allows you to make really high quality visualizations. I work on a project called Oregon by the Numbers. Every year, I work with a foundation here. We produce this. All of the visualizations in this report are made in R. And so you can see, simple things like bar charts, stack bar charts. I made a population pyramid. Maps are also possible with R. And because R is open source, remember how I talked about different packages? They're basically packages that allow you to do all of these different types of visualizations. This is another example of a report that we worked on. And you can see, again, kind of the range of visualization types that you can make. These are all made with the ggplot2 package. This is one of the tidyverse packages. And the thing with ggplot is that it's used all over the place. So this actually links, here, I'll put this in the chat. There's an article about how ggplot is everywhere. This was written, I think, a couple years ago when ggplot was 10 years old. The thing with ggplot is you don't necessarily know that it's ggplot, right? Like if you see a Tableau dashboard, it's a Tableau dashboard because they put the name Tableau on it. ggplot, you don't necessarily know that. So the thing, but when you see visualizations in the New York Times, BBC, 538, a lot of them are made with ggplot, but without that branding, people don't know that. But just know that it's super powerful for making really high quality data viz. R also offers really unique reporting possibilities. Up to this point, I've talked about kind of static visualizations, but last year we made, oops, let me bring this across. We worked with some folks in the Bay Area who wanted to build a map to show food resources for the Asian Pacific Islander community in that city. And we made this interactive map all within R. This entire website was made exclusively with R. And so you can see, for example, it allows you to zoom in, click on different types of food resources, supermarkets, what else? Another supermarket, what's this one? That's an international grocery store. And you can also filter. So for example, like let's say I only want to see where there are farmers markets. Well, I can filter and now I can see where the farmers markets are. We also set it up so that you can show the Asian Pacific Islander population in various neighborhoods. And again, this was all done with R. But the thing that I think is really R's killer feature is what's known as RMarkdown. And to explain what RMarkdown is, let me talk about kind of like a typical workflow that I used to use and I see other people using. Let's say you get some data and you work with SPSS. You get your data, you bring it into SPSS, you do your analysis, then you spit out your clean data, you take it into Excel, you use that, you make some chart, then you copy that chart into Word and you write your report. Now, this often works totally fine. But what happens when you realize, oh, shoot, there was one survey response that I was supposed to include that I forgot to include? You have to go all the way back to the SPSS step. You can't just kind of like rerun this automatically. It involves doing that manual work over and over and over. Or say you do the survey in September and then you want to do it again in October. Again, manual work each time. RMarkdown allows you to automate this, and it does that by combining text and code into a single document. So on the left, what you're seeing is an RMarkdown document, and that's got some code down here in the gray, and then up here, it's got text. And what happens with RMarkdown, and I'm going to show this in a second with the report that I made based on the surveys that you just did. What happens is when you do what's called knitting, which is just a funny way of saying exporting, you can export to kind of whatever format you want. Word is one that I showed here. And what happens is this code now gets converted, in this case, into a graph. And so you can set up your RMarkdown document so that you know in advance kind of what your data will look like. And then whenever you get data, you can just kind of rerun it and regenerate reports. I really like this quote from Dana Wanzer, who talks about how with RMarkdown, for her, all the work is done up front. Every time she does a session where she does a survey, she only needs to spend 15 minutes or so generating the report and sending it to her clients. So let me actually pause for a second because I just went over a whole bunch of things before we actually get into looking at the survey that I generated. Let me see if there are any questions. All right, not seeing any. I will go ahead, but please feel free to interrupt me and put things in the chat. So let me go over here. So what we are looking at here, remember how I asked you to do a survey? I have already generated the results for this survey. So you can see demystifying our survey report. About our respondents, we did a survey on September 8th, today. We received responses from 7 people. People listed their age. The youngest respondent was 31. The oldest respondent was 47, and the mean age was 39.1. Now, of course, I didn't know who was going to show up today. I didn't know that the youngest person was going to be 31. I didn't know the oldest person was going to be 47. I didn't know the mean age. I was able to generate this automatically, and I'm going to show you how in just a minute after I walk through the report. So I made a chart here. Now, it's broken down into different groups. Looks like everybody is between 30 and 50 who's joining us today. So I then made another chart showing educational levels. So it looks like one person with a bachelor's, one with a master's, one with a doctoral degree. And again, all of this is generated dynamically. Oh, I forgot to, hold on one second. I was showing someone this and I forgot to generate the map. So what I'm doing now, I'm actually in RStudio and I am generating the report. And what happened is I had actually, yesterday, I had changed some code so that it wouldn't generate the map because I wanted to do something slightly different. So I'm actually just changing it so it does generate the map, and then I'm re-knitting it or just exporting it again to regenerate the report. Okay, so let me refresh this. Oh, why didn't that work? I'm not quite sure why that didn't work. Let me see. Well, I'll come back to that in a second. Let me talk briefly about the gender piece. So I asked you to list your gender, and instead of having the closed response, this is what you actually put. So female, female, male, female, male, woman. And so using that gender coder package, what I was able to do is I was able to take your original responses and then I can recode them. And the gender coder package is smart enough. It knows, for example, lowercase female is the same as uppercase female. And you can see it recodes those. And so our responses here are, we have in total, 2 folks who listed what gender coder recoded as man, 4 who listed or who were recoded as woman. And the nice thing with gender coder is there are ways you can kind of set it up so that you determine like what, like a kind of custom dictionary. So if folks list different terms that you want to be, for example, recoded as non-binary or something else, you can give that to gender coder, and gender coder will recode in the way that you want it to. Last thing, I just asked for some things about familiarity. And so I put that your average familiarity was 2.4, and I made a little chart to show, looks like folks with doctoral degrees have slightly more familiarity. And then your interest in learning R, and it looks like everybody put 5. Makes sense, you're on a webinar learning about R. And the nice thing is I made what are called small multiples, which is basically making multiple charts. And I can do that with R. Actually, let me show you the, so if you look, for example, like a better example of small multiples, this is a reports that we did for on housing data in the state of Connecticut. So these pie charts, for example, are small multiples where we make one chart here looking at % of homes occupied by owners, one for Andover, which is this town, one for Tolland County, which is the county where Andover is located, and one for Connecticut. And we can do this really efficiently in R by basically adding one line of code to make this as opposed to like one pie chart. So let me actually kind of take you briefly behind the scenes and show you how this worked. So when I had you do the survey, you did it in Google Forms, right? And from there, the data went into a Google Sheet. There is an R package right here called Google Sheets 4, which allows me to read in data directly from Google Sheets. And so what I do is, at a conceptual level, I bring in that data from Google Sheets, and then I have code set up that's automatically going to summarize it. Just to kind of orient you a bit when you look at an RMarkdown document, because you probably have never done that if you're just starting out with R, there are really kind of three main sections. This section is called the YAML. It's just like the front matter. It kind of tells you about the document, gives you the title here. This is the output format. Like, do I want to make, in this case, I wanted to make an HTML document. Do I want to make a Word document or PDF or whatever? Then what you'll see throughout is gray sections, which are code, interspersed with white sections where we have text. So that's text. That's text as well. It looks a little funky, but I'll explain why and what's going on there. So what I do then, again, I bring in the data. So right here, this section of the code is bringing in data from that Google Sheet. Then I'm running a function called clean names, just makes the variables easier to work with. I'm converting a variable called timestamp. I'm making it into a date. If you've ever done Google Forms, you know there's the first column just shows when the survey was completed. And then what I do is I filter to only keep responses from today, because I've done this presentation many times. And so that allows me to just filter for today's responses. And so I end up with survey responses, and I save that then as survey responses today. So up here, I have what's called an object in R, which is just my data saved. Down below, let me actually go back to here and show you like this section here about our respondents. We did a survey on September 8th. We received responses from 7 people. So first of all, about our respondents shows up right there. Notice how it has a £sign there. What that does when we knit it, it's called markdown text. It's just a way of adding formatting to your text with plain text. So instead of going into Word and hitting like header 1, we put a £sign right there, and then this gets converted into a first level header. Now, if you look at this line here, that's the same as this. We did a survey on September 8th, 2022. But here, what you're going to see is it looks a little different. We did first of all, survey is bold. So those asterisks make it bold. But then really what's most interesting is this section here. What I have done up here in this code chunk is I've written code that gets today's month, gets today's day, and gets today's year, and then combines them into a variable called today pretty. And if I just run that, you'll see what it shows is September 8th, 2022. So what happens here, this little backtick R says, hey, this is our code. And so when I put today pretty, when it knits, when it exports, it automatically converts that into the value of today pretty, which is September 8th, 2022. If I do this tomorrow, it'll automatically update to September 9th. Same thing with this line. We receive responses from however many people. Right up here, I'm calculating the number of responses. N row is just number of rows of survey responses today. And so number of responses is 7. And so that's how, when we do this here, it automatically updates that. If we keep going on, you'll see kind of I'm doing something really similar where I'm calculating. This is code that calculates the mean age. And so I use that here. I say the mean age was mean age. Same thing with max age and min age. And then down here, while the code is a little complicated and isn't necessarily going to make a ton of sense, here, let me show this one. What this is just code that makes this plot. And so again, when I run this, it just generates that plot. And basically the rest of it, I'm actually not sure, to be honest, why the, let me knit it again and see if it changes anything. I don't actually know why the map, the interactive map, didn't show up. Yeah. Basically, the rest of it is just a series of code chunks that make graphs, or with gender coder, for example, kind of makes a table interspersed with text. Yeah, I don't know why that's not shown. Oh, I know why. I'm not actually looking. Hold on. I'm looking at the wrong document. There we go. So now, for example, we can see where folks are located. So there's our friend in Portland, LA, Mason, Cincinnati, Toledo. And so basically what it does is it takes the data that you gave it, geocodes it, puts it on a map, and then creates this map. A couple folks in the UK as well. And the nice thing is, if I were to get additional responses, I could automatically update this survey, and I would see the new results right away. So we're just about done. Let me just talk about one other thing that I think is a real value of R before we move on to answering any questions. The other thing that R allows you to do is what's called parameterized reporting. And we do a ton of this. We work with clients, we do consulting work where we help them. And so if you remember, for example, that, this project where we actually worked with the folks in Connecticut, they came to us because they said, we have to make 169 reports plus reports for each county, 169 towns in the state of Connecticut, and then I think it was like 7 counties. We have no idea how we're going to do this. They were using Excel. If you're doing that in Excel and Word, it would take a lot of manual work. So with R, what you're able to do is you're able to automate this. So you essentially make one RMarkdown template, and then you tell R, okay, generate this report for Andover, then generate this report for Ansonia, then generate this report for Ashford. It's just really efficient to make multiple reports at the same time. And actually, I know Charlie was working with a client who was generating like 10,000 reports, I think it was. This client works at a county office of education and wanted to generate one report for each student in the county. And so it's, makes that possible in a way that if you're working in Excel, it frankly just probably wouldn't be possible. So with that, I think, last thing I'll say is I think really the best reason to learn R is the community. So unfortunately, this is not quite at the beginning. I'll go back to the top in a second. This is a tweet thread where somebody, Eileen Parks, this is several years ago now, was saying she was planning to learn R, 37-year-old mother, could she do it? And take a look at the responses that she got. R is incredibly, the R community, unlike a lot of tech communities, frankly, is incredibly welcoming and really supportive of newcomers. And so the really nice thing is when you learn R, you can find people who are willing to help, and you don't have to be kind of like scared to ask questions, which is a real value. All right, let me stop there and see what questions folks might have. I see someone raising their hand. Go ahead and Gustavo, you feel free to either put in the chat or unmute yourself. Either one is totally fine.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to, I'm going to run with the, or I guess I'm going to expose myself here with some of my fears around R. And, you know, I'm one of those journalists that don't have an expertise in any one single area, don't have complex statistics, no deep knowledge in any one domain area, no coding experience. You know, the most complex tool I've used is Excel. However, I've been exposed to very smart people over the years with at least one of those expertise I mentioned, and I understand well the power of R. So you don't have to sell me R because it's an amazing tool. I understand that. I've tried R courses, but at some point I get lost in the process of learning. However, you know, because I've been exposed to those smart people, I'm resourceful and have many simple ideas I like to implement myself using R through the projects I'm working on, you know, whether it's improving workflows, automation, data visualization, all of those things. So I know I'm taking a little bit longer than I should, but I just kind of wanted to give you that a little bit of background of where I'm coming from. Yeah. So one of the challenges that I experience is how to logically structure code. You know, what comes first, what comes after. It's sort of like you have to get in this mindset so that you can efficiently write code. I'm also getting closer to my 50s. Again, I'm not going to expose here myself, but sometimes I feel like I have those kids that are 20 years old and that they're just, you know, much more efficient, much more quicker. And so I've been kind of, you know, growing this insecurity on my end. Like, you know, am I too late for this? Should I just kind of walk out of this ability, a challenge of learning R because it's just going to take me a lot longer. And I have, there's kids that are coming out are so efficient, you know, and cost, one third of what, of what I would cost to do the project. So, you know, these are fears that I understand that's, they're in my head. But again, your courses have been following, I bet your work and it's very tempting. I saw the video from Charlie and Charlotte that, about how you help and provide that feedback it was amazing. It was kind of, wow, that's awesome. So I'm hoping I'm clear with the question, but that's one of the things. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
Yeah, maybe Charlie, do you want to talk about kind of like learning slightly later and what that experience is like for folks that you see?
Yeah, I definitely don't think there's an upper age limit for learning R at all. There have been, I tried to quickly find them on Twitter, but there are a few folks who've joined the R stats community on Twitter, over 50 and above, and who've blogged about their experience, but I'm drawing a blank on their names right now. And in terms of structuring things, that is something that everybody struggles with. And so Hadley Wickham, who you might know, so Hadley Wickham's he's the main author of ggplot2 and of the tidyverse, and he says, and lots of people say in our community, you have to write bad code before you can write good code. You have to start writing something before you can make anything work at all. And using RMarkdown for your code can really help because it keeps the narrative structure of what you want to do in your code. And it's fine to just write a bunch of notes about this isn't working, I'm trying to do this. At the bottom of almost all the documents I'm working on, there's a big heading that says dragons below here. And that's where I put all of the stuff that I'm working on that doesn't work. And fearing how quickly you move compared to other people is something that I feel as well. R is my second language that I'm very good at, and I have some lack of confidence about how quickly I can move. But I know I can do good things, and I can bring to projects lots of experience that I have from different walks of life. So I suppose we should also say, R in 3 months is a really good opportunity because you do work with your own data during the course. So each week you'd be applying what we're teaching to your own data. And if it's not making sense, that's fine. I've had folks that submit assignments that don't work, and then my feedback videos, I mean, making it work. Yeah.
Well, let me add on to that. I'll just add a couple of things, and then we can get to the other questions. I think one of the things to think about, Gustavo, is that, I mean, sure, like I totally get. I started learning when I was like 35, and yeah, I see people who are, you know, in their 20s or lower doing things much more efficiently than me. But what I always try to remind myself is I'm more efficient than my past self working in other tools. And ultimately, like, that's of greater benefit than comparing myself to what other people do. And the other thing about R is that a lot of people, unlike programming languages that people learn in like kind of computer science courses or that type of thing, most people come to R for some other reason. It's not that they're like, I want to be a computer programmer, I'm going to learn R. They come to it because, you know, they're a survey researcher or they're a biologist and need to work with their data. And so, you know, I think while I know it can be intimidating, just my experience has been that a lot of people are not, don't have that kind of like computer science hardcore background as much in R as with some other places. Tom asked about the fine details of formatting and sizing the output for reports. Yeah, that's very challenging. That's actually why we do a lot of that for our consulting work. And Tom, feel free to chime in. I don't know what type of reports you're producing, because the way you format and size things depends if you're doing like HTML versus PDF or Word. But it is complicated, and yeah, anyway, if you put like kind of what you're working with, or follow up by email with me, I can give you some specific tips. Not Helen, Chris says, I've been teaching myself R, the sheer volume of things to learn. Absolutely. I know that was like really challenging for me. And I think one of the things that helped me the most was focusing on the tidyverse. There are, I think there are like 10 or so kind of core packages that are part of the tidyverse. If you can just focus on learning those and learning that approach, that will get you like 90% of the way there in terms of what you do, maybe even higher than that. And so, and we teach with a tidyverse approach. But I would, rather than thinking, oh my gosh, I need to learn this and that, like focus on that. And then from there, you can explore further. I don't know if Charlie, you have any other advice on that one, but that's my main thought on that.
Yeah, so when I first started learning in 2015, there was very much this mindset. There's all this new package that is out, and we need to learn this package. And everyone was kind of, everyone was following that, and that's died a death a little bit now, in part thanks to the tidyverse. And I think using the tidyverse is good because it gives you a way to approach problems. So some people talk about the tidyverse as being a cult and something like that, but it's not. What it is it gives you a schema that you can use to solve problems, always in a specific way. And the nice thing about that problem solving workflow is it feeds into ggplot2. So data visualizations are usually how we make sense of data. If we're using R, we pretty much probably want to make data visualizations, and ggplot2 is very good for that. And learning the tidyverse means that you're going to be working with tidy data, which is what ggplot2 wants and needs. Yeah.
Yep. And Chris, I see your second question here about your main goal to do inferential statistics with data viz. Is R the best way forward for this? I will say I don't do any inferential statistics, so I might not be the best person, but I will, despite that, I do know that, I mean, R was developed as a language by statisticians for statisticians. It's become much broader than that. So while I can't really speak from a place of authority in terms of using it myself, my sense is, yeah, it's definitely a really good way forward. Charlie, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, sure. So I've linked you to Brenton's and Lisa's profiles on Twitter. I think they've recently been having conversations about inferential stats with R, and searching the RStats hashtag for inferential statistics is good. I've done a little bit of inferential stats, and David, we've got a course on inferential
Yep.
statistics now, don't we? Yeah.
Yeah. I put the
Yeah.
link in the chat.
Yeah. So I don't think that RMarkdown would be a distraction from doing and learning how to do the inferential stats in R, unless you're getting distracted with making your report pretty. If you just accept, I'm not making something pretty, I'm using RMarkdown so that I can write my thoughts about my code at the same time as my code, then it will be a useful tool for you. But if you're trying to simultaneously do pretty things, learning how to make pretty things, and doing the stats, that's going to be a distraction. So RMarkdown can be useful for you because you're putting your ideas into the same place as your code, and you're not having to deal with multi-line comments that don't format very nicely. So RMarkdown can be useful for you to learn how to do stats in it, but you just have to give up the idea that you're going to make something that looks pretty to begin with anyway.
Yeah. And the thing with our Markdown is just you write code in it just in the code chunk. So that's the same as working in an R script file where you only write code. It just allows you to add kind of context, I'd say, around that. Great. Let me see if there are any other questions before we wrap up. Super. Well, if you are inspired to start learning R, like I mentioned before, there is a course on the R for the Rest of Us website called Getting Started with R. It's free, goes through some of the things that I talked about today, but just helps get you set up. And then, oops, R in 3 months actually starts in 2 weeks from today. So if you're interested, I put a link to the page there. You can learn more about that. Hesitant to make this overly salesy, but we would love to have you join. It's a really nice combination of course materials as well as kind of individualized feedback. Oh, Charlie, I forgot to put your contact information on here. My contact information, if you have questions, please feel free to email. Actually, Margaret, thank you. Margaret asked, can I say more about what participants will be able to do after the 3-month course? So with R in 3 months, it goes through the materials in the fundamentals of R and going deeper with R. I think, and Charlie, feel free to chime in here, but I think people are set up with the foundations of R. You know how to work with data, do analysis with R, do data visualization with R, and really kind of our goal with R in 3 months is to have people set up so that you can at that point kind of feel oriented and teach yourself any of the other kind of specific things that you want to know. Charlie, do you want to add anything?
One thing I'll add to that is that if you have data in Excel files, or you've got data in CSV files, or maybe tab separated files, and you need to analyze that, R in 3 months will absolutely get you. So you have that data in those files, you bring it into R, you can make sense of that data, and then you can make visualizations of that data. So during the 12 weeks, we'll go through assignments where you're doing each of those things with your data set, and you will go away from R in 3 months knowing if you get a new data set, a new Excel file, a new set of CSV files, you will be able to bring those into R, and you will be able to make visualizations of those and to calculate descriptive statistics as well. And combining all of that together with R Markdown, you'll know how to make reports that look kind of nice. Yeah.
I mean, I think what Charlie's getting at is there's always more to learn, of course, right? But I think probably rather than us telling you, if you look at the R in 3 months page there, if you scroll down, there's an example video. We have folks make videos at the end of what they learned. And there's an example where you can see someone walking through their learning. So you can see kind of like where they get to. Super. Well, I have my email. Personally, I'm on Twitter at DGKais. R for the Rest is the R for the Rest of Us Twitter account. As you've probably realized, the R community is very active on Twitter using, as Charlie mentioned, the RStats hashtag. And Charlie put her Twitter there as well. Charlie's email is charlie@rfortherestofus.com. Super. Well, I think we'll wrap up because it's just about noon Pacific time. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I appreciate you taking time out of your day. And please follow up if you have any questions.
Thanks, folks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.